Welcome back to room 303 in Freshman English, and we are in our MyPerspectives volume on page 313 and following. We're now looking at Natasha Trethewey's incident. Now, we'll do a little bit of background information first. On Natasha Trethewey, first of all, I'm with you on page 313, born 1966, Poet Laureate, or Official Poet of the United States, from 2012 to 2014. She was born in Mississippi to an African-American mother and a white father. Trethewey grew up in the South at a time when laws enforcing segregation had just been overturned, but stark divisions between African Americans and whites were still common. Much of her poetry addresses her biracial heritage, as well as the forgotten histories of African American men and women in the Deep South. Now, specifically, this poem, Incident, which is an incredibly controversial and beautiful poem, during the 1960s, just to read the background information on 313, during the 1960s, the Ku Klux Klan, often referred to as the KKK, a white supremacist hate group that had been active in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, re-emerged in response to the growing civil rights movement. One of their typical acts of terrorism was a cross burning, during which a wooden cross would be set on fire in front of an African American home or church. We're going to be referencing that in this poem, Incident, on page 316. Let's read the poem, and then we'll take care of annotating at level 2 and 3.
Incident by Natasha Trethewey. We tell the story every year, how we peered from the windows, shades drawn, though nothing really happened, the charred grass now green again. We peered from the windows, shades drawn, at the cross trussed like a Christmas tree, the charred grass still green. Then we darkened our rooms, lit the hurricane lamps. At the cross trussed like a Christmas tree, a few men gathered, white as angels in their gowns. We darkened our rooms and lit hurricane lamps, the wicks trembling in their fonts of oil. It seemed the angels had gathered, white men in their gowns. When they were done, they left quietly. No one came. The wicks trembled all night in their fonts of oil. By morning, the flames had all dimmed. When they were done, the men left quietly. No one came. Nothing really happened. By morning, all the flames had dimmed. We tell the story every year.
Now, of course, this is a poem about reclaiming, recovering a memory of the past that is, of course, tragic and compelling, brutal and disgusting. Notice we begin with the word we. And obviously, the question is, what's the antecedent to the pronoun we? Obviously, it is people who are specifically traumatized by a cross burning, the incident. Notice, we tell the story every year, and then we end the story at the end of the poem at line 20. We tell the story every year. Now let's begin by reminding ourselves in 303, we've often said that we are the stories that we tell. We are the stories we retell. We're also the stories that we decide to accept or the stories we decide to reject. And that is a compelling way, I think, to read what is being suggested here in Incident. What is this story? Well, it begins with peering, with looking. But notice peering is kind of like not fully looking. It's like just, trying to figure out how to look without looking. Peering from the windows, shades are drawn. You might jot down in your notes, why do you think the shades are drawn? Fear, obviously, is so palpable in this poem, right? Shades drawn, though nothing really happened. We'll come back to this nothing really happened at line 17, 18, won't we? Right? Nothing really happened. The charred grass now green again. Why do we say nothing really happened? Well, it's a question of how you define what it is that is happening. In other words, this was a message that was being sent, this burning of the cross, to keep people in fear, to horrify them in some way. Notice the second stanza. We peered, we're back to this viewing, looking. From the window, shades drawn, at the cross trussed like a Christmas tree. Now this image of the Christmas tree is compelling because obviously we've got angels as well. And so notice that Trethewey is going to be playing around with powerful images in their reverse understanding. These are not angels of light. These are angels of darkness, angels of fire, angels of the horrors, right? And yet notice, we'll start out with a cross trussed or dressed up, right, like a Christmas tree. And then again, the charred grass still green. Then we darkened our rooms, lit the hurricane lamps. Now, of course, hurricane lamps meaning the only light available to us, right? It's a powerful symbol as well. At the cross, dressed like a Christmas tree, a few men gathered, white as angels in their gowns. And here, obviously, we're speaking of the KKK, right? We darkened our rooms and lit hurricane lamps. Notice the repetition, right? This very much like the poem that we just looked at, For My People, Margaret Walker's poem. Notice the repetitions. Put this in your notes at 3B, or 2B. The repetitions are compelling here, right? A few men gathered white as angels in their gowns. We darkened our rooms, lit hurricane lamps, the wicks trembling in their fonts of oil, right? Now this word tremble will capture so powerfully the idea of fear. It seemed the angels had gathered white men in their gowns. When they were done, they left quietly. That is to say, the horror, the fear has been spread, and then they can leave. The message has been sent. The horrific message has been sent. Notice, no one came. Now some have argued that's the most compelling line of the entire poem. No one came. In other words, there is no one from this incident that's going to save the onlookers. It's going to stop this kind of insanity. No one came. You get the sense no one cared, in other words, right? No one cared at all that this was happening. No one came. The wicks trembled all night in their fonts of oil. By morning, the flames had all dimmed. Now, of course, the flames here can be the flames of the cross. It can also be the flames of the hurricane lamps, either one, right? When they were done, the men left quietly is repeated. No one came is repeated. Nothing really happened is repeated. By morning, all the flames had dimmed is repeated. We tell the story every year is repeated. What are we saying here? The power of repetition, the power of needing to tell the story again and again, to be reminded of the incident. Why? Well, let's go ahead and do some annotative work here. Obviously, at level 2B, we're talking about powerful symbols. What's the most powerful one for you here? Some will say it's the cross, some will say it's the white angels, some will say it's the hurricane lamps, some will say it's the grass that's no longer charred. What is for you the tone of voice of a poem like this, the mood of a poem like this? At 3A, go ahead and put a note to yourself about how this poem is very similar in its power to Margaret Walker's For My People. And as well, ask and try and answer the question, how does a poem like this relate to our study of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream, as well as King's Letter from a Birmingham Jail? How do those work together for you? Finally, at 3B, what do you want to say about a poem like this in regards to the fear? When was the last time that you were really, really afraid and no one came? And what does that suggest in regards to the need for being able to appreciate the great fear that others have had in their life when no one came? And then, of course, finally, how do you deal with the history that is represented in a poem like this? How do you understand it? How do you live beyond it? And of course, it's the living beyond it that's the real reason the story must be told, right? That is to say, we tell the story every year so that it will not be forgotten. Well, I hope that this will lead you on to more of Trethewey's amazing poetry. And I hope that you're being challenged by our study here of the civil rights movement. Thank you.